Good evening and welcome to this evening's session on ignition timing. This is possibly the most crucial part of tuning. It's relatively easy to get the air fuel ratio correct. It's relatively easy to get the boost set correctly, but make a mistake on the ignition timing and it will either be bad performance or bad in respect of bits of the engine trying to escape. So what I'm going to try and do in this session is give you a basic understanding of when to set the spark and why. Hopefully, as a result of that, you'll understand what I'm talking about as far as what is good ignition timing. It was a question raised in a live stream a few weeks ago by one of the viewers. Thank you very much. As in, what is good ignition timing? So hopefully I'll cover that. If you're joining this for the live stream, then thank you very much. Please say hi, say where you're from. It amazes me reading back comments and seeing people from all around the world that tune into these or write comments afterwards. It still blows my mind. Comments from Australia, America, Uruguay, Central Africa, Romania, everywhere. So say hi, where you're from, and it will just help me because it will mean that I know that I'm not just sat here at a desk talking to myself. So if you're watching on replay, by all means, write any questions in the comments. I do reply to all of them, and I keep and I will try to keep doing that for as long as possible until the numbers just get ridiculous. But that would be a good problem to have. So without further ado, I'm going to crack on. Oh, there we go. First one, Jessica as well from Romania. Hello. Dom in Torquay, and Devon, and we have Grant from Lancashire. Right. Hello, mate. Right. Okay, so ignition timing. Let me show you something you've probably seen before, but this is the combustion cycle. So intake, so the piston's coming down, like the crank's revolving, it's sucking in the air and the fuel until it gets to the bottom, and then it goes up and squashes the air and the fuel, and then you have the bang, which pushes the piston down, and then the piston comes back up and blows that air out of the exhaust. Great, easy. It's called the Otto cycle after the guy who invented it for a 4-stroke engine. What have we got here? Yes, Dan. Yes, 95 is not good unless it's mapped for 95. Right, and who else have we got here? All right, Norway A2WRX planning engine swap. Great, good. Right, so we have the combustion cycle: intake, compression, expansion, exhaust, suck, squash, bang, blow, whatever you want to call it. It's the same 4 elements. What I'm going to concentrate is on this element, the bang. This is the crucial part. This is the part that makes power. This is the part where it could go badly wrong if you're doing the wrong things. So I'm going to talk about the best time to set the spark off, to push this piston down as hard as possible and as safely as possible, and that's what creates the power within the car. So you would think that the best time to start it would be when the piston has reached the top and is on its way back down. And partly you're right, and it varies engine by engine as to how efficient the flame is in traveling across the actual cylinder. But the ideal point, because when you set off the spark, that isn't the explosion. You know, the start is the spark is the start of it. It then propagates, the flame travels, and you get gradually more and more of that air fuel mixture that explodes, that creates the force that releases the energy, and the fuel pushes the piston down. So what we want to do is we start the spark before the piston has got to the top in the compression stroke. We're talking in Subaru terms in respect of time in advance. So how many degrees before top dead center, before the piston's right at the top. So we start the spark at that point. The flame travels at a certain speed, and it's always traveling at that speed for normal air that's been squashed. So we know if we start the spark, let's say 34 degrees before the pistons hit top dead center, then the big bang will happen at the optimum point as the piston's just starting to move back down, because you get a bang in a small space, it produces a lot of energy. If you wait and push start the spark while the piston's going back down, then the space is bigger and you're already pushing away from something that's moving away from you. So, you know, it's wasted energy. Right, so, okay. So let me go back into here. So the point of peak pressure, we want that piston to be just coming back down the bore, so that the energy drives the crank round and, you know, creates the power. That peak point, that point of peak pressure is when the flame has traveled across the whole cylinder. And that's the flame front. The speed of that doesn't vary, but it doesn't vary for normal aspirated engines, but it does, you know, when you start talking about the effect of boost, when you're squashing more air and more fuel in there, you know, the flame will travel quicker. And you'll see that when I come onto the ignition tables within the Subaru engine as to the effect on that. Also, if you have an engine with a higher compression ratio, then the air and the fuel will be squashed that much tighter together, and the flame will travel molecule to molecule much quicker. So you would tend to start the spark a bit later. So you would have less ignition advance for higher compression. Okay. So if we then go on to talk about this, which is something else that has a big impact, the fuel type and the quality of the fuel, like the octane rating or the RON rating, MON rating. The higher the octane rating of the fuel, the more inclined the engine is for that flame to burn cleanly all the way across the cylinders. And also different fuels like methanol, ethanol, you know, the flame travels at a slightly different speed, so you'd have to reflect that in the ignition timing. So when do we start the spark? As early as possible, basically, but that has to be dictated by the detonation, i.e. we don't want an uncontrolled explosion in there. So we want to start it as early as possible so that we get the smallest amount of space for the air and the fuel to be in, so we get a bigger bang. All right. Okay, so if you start the spark too late, the piston will already be moving away from you. You will waste the energy that's in the fuel, and the power will be much lower than it should be. If you start it too early, SPARL, that should say spark. If you start the spark too early, then the piston could be like super compressed at the top, or it might not even have finished the compression stroke, in which case the explosion is trying to force the piston back round the wrong way, blow holes in the top of the pistons, head gaskets, all kinds of issues. Generally not good. So it's important to if I go on this one, right, there is a video that I did a couple of months back on how to make deck cans. Crucially important when you're tuning a Subaru to use deck cans, because it is incredibly destructive and it's very hard to hear with the naked ear, whereas the deck cans amplify that. And in that video, I'll put a link in the description after the event, but in that video I'll show you how to make a set of those. Right, so how does the Subaru ECU work it out? Right, how does a Subaru ECU work it out? Right, if I come on to this second slide, hopefully you can read this. This is the base ignition timing for a 2006 WRX. So 2.5 EJ25 engine, just the standard base ignition map. So this is a minimum amount of ignition timing that the engine or the ECU will add. As you can see along the top here, it says engine load. So if you try and think of that as more boost, and obviously revs down the left hand side. So around this 3,600 RPM mark at 2.5 on the load, there'd be a base ignition timing of 2.5 degrees of ignition advance. So it would start the spark 2.5 degrees before the pistons get to the top dead center. So then the big explosion will be at the right time for when the piston's traveling at a certain speed. But there's also another element within this, which if you've done any of the data logging, you would see that there is an element called the advanced multiplier. Now this on a modern Subaru, like 2006 onwards, that would be between 0 and 1. On the older ones, it would be between 0 and 16. And what that does, it's effectively an engine happiness scale. So if the engine and the ECU are happy, it will have either a value of 1 or 16 if it's the older 16-bit ECU. So if it's at a value of 1, then there is another table within there, which is the knock correction or ignition advance. So this is an extra set of tables where it adds this to the previous figure. So let's say at 3,000, 3,200, it's 2.5 degrees. But on there, you've got pretty much 6 degrees of advance on there. If the advance multiplies at 1, it's adding 2.5 to 6 or 6 to 2.5 and coming up with, it will aim to run 8.5 degrees of ignition timing at that point. So a load of 2.5 at that RPM, it will do that. I use, as I probably said before, a piece of software called ECU Edit. I will put a link in after the video for the website to actually download that if you want to get hold of that. But within that, you can you can run a little calculator function that will add those two tables together, because it's pretty hard to just visualize, you know, the effect of 6 degrees on top of that, and then, you know, at 4,800 that goes down to 4 degrees, so it makes it hard to visualize it. So if you can run the calculator function in ECU Edit, it adds those two tables together, and there's this nice slidey bar across the top where you can see at any particular point in the advanced multiplier what the total timing will be. So here it's like it's working it out on the basis of 16ths, but if the advanced multiplier is 1 on a new one, then it would do the same thing. So this is combining those two tables together to tell you what the advance, when to start the spark. Okay, is that clear? If I go back to everyone following that so far, yeah. Okay, so at 3,200, 8.48. So it's starting the spark 8.48 degrees before the piston hits the top of the cylinder on the compression stroke, and then by the time the flame has traveled across the cylinder, the piston's already on its way down. That explosion happens, pushes the piston down, everyone's happy, car's moving forward and for the next compression and ignition event. With lower quality fuel, you would run lower ignition values here. This is the standard map for 99 RON fuel. You base that on what the ECU and what the engine was happy with. So it's something that you need to understand what's going on and what happens, and recognize the sound of detonation starting. So as I say, I did cover making a set of those in a previous video. I will do a video soon on what det sounds like. I'll do that on my own engine, just to show, or so that you can hear what it sounds like at the start, and if I feel brave enough, for what a major detonation event sounds like. So that will come soon, but at the moment I just wanted to give you a broad outline on the ignition timing subject before we start tuning an ECU, tuning your car. Okay, so that is a combined ignition timing table. Okay, so more load, particles are close and packed together, the flame travels quicker, so you don't need to start the spark as early, so you can start it slightly later, hence why the timing goes down as it's under more boost. And generally what happens to a degree is the timing will go up with revs, because the flame only travels at a certain speed for the density of the air and the fuel within the cylinder, but the piston's traveling much faster as it comes up the rev range. So you want to give it a bit of a head start on getting to the same point in the cylinder, so that it's the maximum explosion and the safest. Okay, right, any other things on there? Right, one thing I would say is the ECUs on the Subaru have got knob control in them. Going to the ignition advanced tables, if I go back to that, it will take out up to this amount in the knob correction advance. It will take out that amount if it hears anything going along or anything going wrong, but don't rely on it, because they don't all do the same, and they don't all listen as well as they should do. It's kind of like when you were learning to drive, your driving instructor probably had pedals over his side, right, on the right hand side if you're a European or American car, or on the left hand side in the UK. And it's kind of like relying on them to brake suddenly if you needed to. So I wouldn't rely on it. So whenever you're tuning, tune for what you're seeing, what you're hearing, in particular what you're hearing, because you don't want the ECU to be making those corrections for you. Okay. Right, so you can't rely on the knock control. It's nice if it works. Sometimes it's annoying because on the 32-bit ECUs, in particular on the Hawkeyes, they can get a bit of a paddy on at low RPM, sort of 2000 RPM, where it isn't actually knocking or isn't detting, but it hears a noise, sometimes a clutch plate vibrating, or a gearbox or something else within the engine bay that is causing a vibration or a noise. Quite often I see the advanced multiplier dropping down if there is a heat shield rattle, and that is particularly annoying. So that's where it will try and get to if the engine is happy, or if the ECU is happy. If it's not happy, then it will take out, like if your advanced multiplier is at 0.5, then it will take out half, or it will only add on half of the ignition advance. So at 3200, we got 2.5 on the base timing, and we got 6 degrees there. So it would only add 3 degrees to that 2.5, 5.5 degrees. It would feel really flat, really flat. And it is ignition timing on a Subaru engine that makes the power. Yeah, the fueling mid 11, low 11, but the ignition timing is where the power comes from. Right, any questions? Has everyone gone to sleep? No, right. Okay. What I wanted to say next on this is some ECUs, some of the Subarus have got many ignition timing maps. Like the STIs have got a timing map A, timing map B. It's very difficult to totally understand from when the ECU is applying map A or map B. So my advice on that would be just make them both the same, so that there's no question about it. And the same with the hatchbacks and the later cars. There's many ignition maps, some with VVT, some without VVT. If you make them all the same, then you know that you've tested it in that situation. That's good to know. Thanks, mate. Right, at least someone's awake. Right. Okay. Where's my list of things to talk about? All right. So when to start the spark, that is the crucial part. It will vary depending on how much boost, and it will vary depending on what the revs are. How much boost will dictate how quickly the flame travels in the cylinder, and that is then the base reference for, you know, for higher revs where it's needing to start earlier because the engine's moving that much quicker and the piston's moving that much quicker. It is absolutely critical on the ignition timing. You put huge figures in here, it will blow holes in pistons before you even blink an eye. So make sure whatever you're doing, get a set of deck cans on there and lift off if you're doing any kind of tuning on this. Right. Okay, I think that covers it. Now, as I say, I don't want to go into too much detail for tuning a particular example. That will come. I will do that. I'm going to try and figure out how to do that live in the dyno cell. Might be a bit of a challenge. I might need an assistant to do some filming, but that will be a little bit further down the line. But if you've got any other questions on the ignition timing side of things, fire them away now. And I'll start to wrap up on this. Okay. Right. What I'll do next, as far as these individual tuning modules, is fueling. Should be a reasonably simple subject. It's quite an easy thing to get right within the ECU. Until you get to the limits of things like MAF sensors, in which case it can get a little bit more complicated when you're rescaling MAF. But you know, we'll cover that, and that will be part of the series for hopefully for you to refer back to in the future. But this one was all about the ignition timing. Hopefully that makes it clear. Just to recap on that, it's the base timing plus the knock advance. There are other corrections for intake temperature and coolant and all the rest of it, but the knock advance based on what the advanced multiplier is. So if the advanced multiplier is 1, then it will add all of this, or if it's 16 on an earlier one. If the advanced multiplier is 0.5, then it'll add half of this, or 8 on an earlier ECU. And you know, that is the essence of it. Then we can have fun at a later date with pops and bangs, and I'll show you how to do that. If you want to watch that video, that's proved to be quite popular. Right, I'm going to call it a day on that. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time. Thank you.